On episode 270 of the Tennis Files podcast, you'll learn how to become a tough competitor, reduce errors, and forget about losing with legendary tennis player and coach, Brad Gilbert. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the show. I'm really excited to have on Brad Gilbert, who, as many of you know, reached number 4 in the world and coached amazing professional tennis players such as Andre Agassi, Andy Roddick, Andy Murray, Kei Nishikori, and the list goes on. And it was super cool because Brad came to the Junior Tennis Champions Center here in Maryland a couple of weeks ago now, from the date of this recording of the intro at least. And I was able to go up to him and ask if he could come on the podcast, and he seemed receptive. And then big shout out to Harry Tong from Tennis Spin, because I did email Harry and ask if he could provide an introduction as well, since Harry, as you know, works and manages Brad Gilbert's tennis shop in Cali. So Brad was gracious enough to grant my request, and we recorded this interview, which again, really excited for you to listen to, because we go into a lot of great topics, such as how to develop a no-quit relentlessness, how to have short-term memory loss, like Serena Williams and Roger Federer. We talk about visualization, how you can reduce errors, which is huge, and how to just overall become a tough competitor. And his advice really helped, as I put on my Instagram story, which is probably expired by now, but I actually had 9 mixed doubles sectionals this past weekend, and I won both my matches, including one match where I was down 6-4, 4-1. And so, to be totally honest, at that point, I was trying to think of what to do, and I remembered my interview with Brad, which I had done, a few days before that tournament happened. And I just remembered the lessons that he gave me, and just really the main point of just finding a way to win, that winning ugly, is the way to go a lot of the time. You're not playing your best, but you need to find a way to win. And I just kept really mentally tough. And number one of all was just believing that I could win, because it's so easy when you're down like that to just kind of give up and say, well, I guess it's not going my way. But I had that extra kick in the front of my pants, if you will, from thinking about Brad and, just his overall philosophy on tennis. And I was actually binge listening to his podcast as well. We'll have a link to that, with his son and some great guests like Darren Cahill, I remember, was one guest, and Vince Van Patten was another guest, those interviews I listened to. And yeah, I also thought about so I am a fan of Tottenham Hotspurs, which is a English Premier League team, and our coach is Antonio Conte, and I just thought of him saying, we need to get to 3 points. He's Italian, so I'm not the best Italian accent person. Wow, I don't know if we need to cut that. I mean, preface that by saying I love Italians. I didn't mean any harm by that horrible accent, but I definitely brought that accent when we were having lunch at Sergio. So shout out to my team when we went there. But yeah, I just thought of, those two coaches, mainly Brad, and just that you need to find a way to win. Exploit your opponent's weaknesses using your strengths, and that's the way to do it. So and we won in the third set tiebreak, and was just super stoked that, I can go back in the bag, that I have developed here, where if I'm down again, I can just remember, what, I've been down pretty far and I've come back. And it makes a huge difference when you can listen to coaches like Brad, epic legendary coaches, and him talk about his experiences playing and coaching, of course. And his book Winning Ugly is like one of the most famous, if not the most famous book of all time for tennis players. So with that, I know you're anxious to hear the interview, and without further ado, here is my interview with Brad Gilbert. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Tennis Files podcast. It's really a pleasure and an honor to have on Brad Gilbert on the show. He needs no introduction, even though in the intro I mentioned all his accolades. But yeah, Brad, it's just great to have you on, and thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. And it's really cool. I'd seen you briefly at the JTCC Center. They do a great job there, and you did a fantastic Q&A. And then I was lucky enough to be able to come up to you, and you so graciously agreed to come to the podcast. So I have a lot of questions. I was talking to my friends too, and they were really excited and had questions they wanted me to ask you as well. But and before that, too, my dad's a huge fan of yours as well because he's Iranian. And so he was a mega fan of Andre, obviously, and just saw you, all the time on TV. But I want to start with a quote from your book, from Winning Ugly, which is an iconic book. That along with Inner Game of Tennis, far and away, are the two most recommended books from my podcast guests. And this was one of the best quotes I ever heard. A comment from somebody in the audience. They said, "How in the hell does this guy win? He hits like a caveman who found a tennis racket." So who is this person talking about? And maybe if you could give us more context.
I don't know where that came from. I don't like to think my strokes were that ugly, by any means. But it's still pretty amazing that 32 years later or something like that, when we did the book, that it's still pretty relevant. That's a pretty cool thing. And I've had so many people come up to me and tell me, how much the book is meant to them. And so that's always a cool thing. So, I love the whole thing about Winning Ugly. And it was done basically to help, club players and juniors, try to maximize their potential instead of, what you learn sometimes just in a lesson.
Yeah. And I just absolutely love it that, you reference club players so often in that. And that's who we are, most of us. And it's not like, Nadal's writing a book about like his, amazing shots.
My most amazing learning experience with Steve, who had never written before, was when we were having lunch one day at the club. And I was starting to study club players. The two guys that he played against were down below. And I was watching the two guys that he played, and within 5 minutes, he'd played these two guys, he said, for 15, 20 years regularly. And within 5 minutes, he was surprised and shocked that I could break down their strengths and weaknesses, and he didn't even know theirs. It's like, how do you play these guys and not know their strengths and weaknesses? So that's when I knew, okay, there's, we can figure some things out here.
Yeah, 100%, Brad. It's funny you mentioned that. When I was a junior, especially, I would just react. I wouldn't be thinking at all about strengths, weaknesses. And then, after interviewing you and amazing other coaches and players, like that's when the gears got going, and able to recognize, patterns and things like that and weaknesses and such. So as far as developing, one of the things that stood out that you find in Nadal and Djokovic and a lot of the great players is developing a no-quit relentlessness, as you put it in your book. So I was wondering, how do you develop that sort of attitude? I mean, it can't just come out from thin air, right?
Everybody has a different DNA. But obviously, the greatest, fortitude for tennis is your ability to compete, your ability to make clear decisions when things are at the highest stakes. Sometimes, like, you see greatness when the match is 5-all in the third. They're not panicking. They're making good decisions. They're thinking about what they're doing. They're actually, more level-headed about what's happening. Things aren't going fast for them. And a lot of times for a lot of players, things are speeding up. Sometimes your decision-making is affected by the score.
Yeah, no, 100%, Brad. And I was binge watching or binge listening to your podcast that you had with your son, which was really cool. A lot of great info in there. And one thing that really stood out was you mentioned, I believe, that when you were working with Andy Murray, there were like 9 matches in a row or something like that where he was up 5-4 in a set and he got broken. And I was wondering if you could let us know about the fix for that. What did you tell him? How did he get through it? Because a lot of club players go through the same thing. It seems like we get to match point, we get to, break points, and we just don't convert at all.
It's funny, that was in the summer of 2006 when we started together. And it was incredible how many times he would serve for a set, serve for a match. And it was almost like he willed himself, or you knew what was going to happen. And this is what does happen to club players and juniors a lot, because we get in our head that we've done this before. We're going to do it again. It's more about the first point. What are we going to execute on our first serve? At that point, Andy, wasn't obviously the player that he became. And there was some, we would talk about a lot of times, that first point, or what you can do, play to your strengths, focus on your opponent's weakness. Sometimes it's, it's finding that balance for a club player and being too aggressive, or, hoping that your opponent is just going to miss. So that is the balance between club players and pros. But I also feel like I used to always tell myself, if I was serving 4-5-4, I was, 4-5 down. It's funny, when I tried that with Andre, he said, that stupid trick don't work on me. I know I'm 5-4 up. You tell yourself you're down. But believe it or not, a lot of players do play better when they're down, or they think they're up against it. But I call most importantly, at least for club players, is making good decisions. What's the strength of your game? What's the weakness of your game? And try to win with the strength of your game. If something's been working, keep doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And it really is, very commendable how you're able to convince yourself about, being down. And I know you have an episode with Vince Van Patten, who plays poker, and I love poker. He's a great commentator as well as former player, tennis player. And I feel like poker players, sometimes that's what they do, when they're bluffing, almost convince themselves like that they have a good hand when they don't. But yeah, I mean, how can we actually do that, would you say? I mean, convince ourselves, because that's obviously key. Like, if we don't, like your son said, if I tell myself that but I don't really believe it, then it doesn't work.
Well, the most important thing is, if we don't serve it out, it's not letting it magnify into umpteen. See, that's also greatness. What, sometimes people ask me, about that. It's like great players don't have these bad runs of losing, umpteen games in a row, opposed to like somebody else that's a middle pro, or it's a college pro. That one bad game becomes 3, 5, 7. And the big thing is, if we don't close it out, is how to hit that quick reset button. How not to, because most people in the club, if they have 5-4, 40-15, don't close it out, they lose the set 7-5. Or they lose 7-5-6. They're still thinking about that one shot. So it's learning how to hit that reset button, that refresh button, that like, okay, how did I get to this point where I'm ahead? How can I finish this point? What just happened here? What can I go back to? An unbelievable, watching Rafa at the U.S. Open. A match that he was unbelievably struggling with against Fanini. Most guys have already lost that match, but it's his competitive spirit that probably goes back to all the way that he was a kid, that he keeps fighting. He keeps, trying to figure something out. And he is the ultimate, too, that if he's 5-0 up or 5-0 down, you don't know it. He also lost the first round to Ricky Hijita. And then same thing. He doesn't let that affect him, that one set becomes 2 sets, how it becomes more. He just keeps competing. And I do feel like a lot of players, a bad run isn't just 1 game, it's 3 games, it's 5, next thing you know, you were 3-0 up and now you're 6-4, 4-0 down. How do you stop that bad run? But most importantly, get back to what was working.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of club players and juniors go away from what's working, or one game, sets off these 5 other matches. I did this, or, it's that negative thoughts that all of a sudden start entering your head. It's tougher said than done, but you got to let that go. Focus on the next game, what's working.
Yeah, yeah, I love that because my question for you was going to ask how to reset, but you talk about like trying to figure out what has been working and go back to that. That's really huge. So another I guess probably a tough question is how do you develop that competitiveness, especially for people who, like you mentioned, Rafa probably developed that from a young age, but how about for club level players who they probably caught the tennis bug late and then now they're all into it. I have friends like this, like they just started a couple years ago and they're playing like 6, 7 times a week, but they want to become, I guess, more competitive and gritty. So at a later age, especially, how do you think, what techniques or training or exercises can we do to like develop our competitiveness more?
It's a good question, but I feel like competing, even when you're practicing, whether or not if you're working in a group or you're doing drills or you're playing a practice set, when you play matches, okay, they count for a reason. But I feel like playing more.
Mm.
If you're playing, one league, it's 2 leagues, it's 3 leagues.
Mm.
But it's keep competing, because the best way to work on your competing at that level is compete, and then also try to add to your game. Okay, if my second serve is a little bit weak, see if I can improve my second serve. What's my one good shot? My forehand. Or my weakness is my backhand. Try to minimize that. It's always something trying to add to your game, which helps. But competing is, something that some people will say, geez, it's a piece of cake in practice. I can't do it in the match. It's vice versa. I can do it. I feel like every time you're out there, it's a good opportunity to compete. But match play is where you learn it. And, you got to keep doing it more if you can. More is better than less.
Yeah, definitely. Just getting in that same environment where you're trying to succeed, which is a serious match play tournament and whatnot. Um, so kind of switching topics a little bit. When I interviewed James Blake, he mentioned that before every match, he would visualize like specific points and like how he would play them and such. And he said that helped him a lot. I was curious, like, what your approach is regarding that. Would you do that type of visualization and, any other sorts of like pre-match preparation that you might think would be helpful for club level players?
It's funny is like when I was a kid and when I play, I call it back in the Stone Ages. I mean, obviously we didn't have the computer and we didn't have going to YouTube and visualize. I would always just, heck, we didn't have a phone. I mean, I would make some notes. Sometimes look at some notes of things that maybe I'd written about, especially when I started doing a lot more in college in my early pro career when I was traveling by myself. When I would watch players play, a lot of times I would always make notes about players' strengths and weaknesses. And then sometimes that, you're playing somebody, you take a look at such and such got a great wide serve, backhand maybe breaks down. Try to just kind of look up, I always would think more about my opponent's strengths and weaknesses and what I would try to, maneuver to make them happen for me. So I always thought, but I was most surprised when I was in college that how many players that I played with in college would worry so much about the result. Almost panic about the result before it would happen. And I was always be like, are you fucking kidding? Why are you so worried about, losing? Or if I lose today, they would always enter. And it's like, no, just focus on what you need to do to be successful, what you're trying to do. I never think about losing. I never would tell myself if I do X, Y, and Z, it would guarantee I would win either. But I certainly wouldn't want to think about that fear of losing. Yeah, it ultimately can happen. But I think worrying about it, and I was surprised how many players worried about that. And actually probably made me better because I actually didn't worry about it, didn't panic about it. Maybe I didn't feel good about it playing Lendl, but if you feel like, okay, you know what, I've worked hard, I've practiced hard. It's no guarantee I'm going to win, but I'm going to think about the positive. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to serve wide to his forehand. I'm going to attack his backhand. So I just think about the little strengths and weaknesses that you could control, not think about losing, and I also feel like too many people would think about, if I do this, this, and that, I'm going to win. I deserve to win. A lot of people, I deserve to win. Why do you deserve to win? Well, doesn't your opponent deserve to win as well? So I think these things that you can control, and I do think another thing I call is really important, all levels, short-term memory loss, let it go. And don't let, when you've blown up a match, that next time that's all you think about, that because you blew one match doesn't mean you're going to blow 5 or 6. I always feel like if you got into the winning position, you're doing something right.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I guess a bit more on that. Like, say when you've blown a match, and I know you talked about this with Serena as well, like having a 3-setter, and the way that she reacted is like incredible, as opposed to people getting destroyed from losing a close match. But yeah, how do you react? Because it's ingrained in a lot of people, like when they lose a tough match, like they're just so down. So what's your immediate advice? Like, what should we think about next?
Okay, everybody's different on how they process it, but most importantly is the short term is, what are we going to do about practice? What are we going to do about getting ready and start focusing on what's upcoming?
Yeah.
And now with YouTube and getting matches, players can, and their coaches, even club players, can take a look at some of their decision making. There's some of these apps now that if you, hang your phone up, I see club players doing it, that you can look at some of your decision making. I think this can be helpful. Sometimes it also can make you crazy. But I think more than anything is letting go what happened. Try to think about, there were some positives there. Let's work hard and get after the next one. But I think attitude is really important, in being able to get through stuff and move on.
Yeah, most definitely, Brad.
And also, I'd like to tell you, listen, I remind the players, me and we don't always have all the answers. There's nothing guaranteed, but you know what? Having a good attitude and just being able to get back out there next time and try and compete and try to have like an empty canvas where you don't have this like doom is going to happen again.
Right. 100%, Brad. Kind of switching a little bit for a moment to the tactical part of things. I was wondering, and you talk about this, how sometimes club players have it in reverse, where when they're in like a tough spot, they're like on the run. That's when they go for the big shot, and then when the ball's in the middle of the court, short ball, that's they end up pushing it. But I was wondering, what are a couple of strategies or tactics for players, club level players, to reduce the amount of errors that they make? Because you have Craig O'Shaughnessy, I've interviewed a few times too. He talks about how like 70% or so of points end in errors and things like that. So what are some ways we can reduce errors without pushing the ball?
Well, first of all, I see more from the 3-5-4-0 in the center of the court where it's terrible. They don't get good spacing, and they don't get their arm enough away from their body where they can even take a good swing. And also too, from the middle of the court, a lot of players relax for a second. They hit that pause button. Oh, I'm okay here. But no, they're not proactive with their feet, don't get the spacing, and then they can't get aggressive. And a lot of times the ball ends up playing them. So that is an area, you want to watch Rafa, watch Fed, watch their feet, watch Serena when the ball's hit down the middle. Watch how they do those little pitter-patter, steps to create space. They don't waste time, even though they have time. So I do think that's one area, and you can practice that. Like with a ball machine, maybe, having a bunch of balls hit down the middle, have a couple of seconds pause in between each one, and really work on your forehand down the middle of the court, opening up the court. I could take the lead to the left or the right. And I also feel like a lot of players just overestimate maybe their skills when they're on the run a little bit. I call it they're going for 1 in 10, 1 in 20 winners. That's when maybe, as Craig says, errors kill you. But you don't get 3 or 4 points for a screaming winner when you're on the run. We're not Djokovic. We're not Nadal. We're not these great players that can do things on the run. So be sensible. Every once in a while, you got a 40-love lead to work with. I understand pulling the trigger. But other than that, try to stay in the point. And I also feel like, too, if you do have decent spacing, don't fear the middle shot. And then that's the time to be aggressive. That's actually the chance that, that maybe I have a chance to do something, especially like on a weak second serve. Just pick a big target and go for a big shot. I say, don't aim for anywhere near the lines, maybe a 4x4 box, go aggressive, big target.
Got it. Beautiful. Great stuff there. Appreciate it. And Brad, another topic that I came across, I'm trying to remember if it was on your podcast or in the book, but you talk about how to set a series of small goals. So I was wondering, what's the optimal way for us to set goals as club level players, do you think, so that we can, progress and add to our toolkit without putting too much pressure so that we just think about the results all the time?
Okay. A big goal, let's say if you're 3-0, is to get to 3-5. 3-5, you get to a 4-0. And it comes by obviously winning matches and improving your game. Like I would always set, if I'm going to play 5 tournaments, maybe instead of thinking I'm going to win this, that, I would set a number. Let's see if I can win, 17 matches. Start with a small goal like that. So, okay, so let's see what my record was last year. If I was 12-8 in doubles, let's see if I can go 14-6. If I was 11-7 in singles, let's see if I can go, 13-5. Let's see if I can improve my serve, just a little bit, and my return. Just small little things. But whatever you did, you just try to set it a little bit more. Say, this year I'm going to really add, my forehand, being a little more aggressive from the center court. I really want to work on my second serve. I do think at some point during the year, for all players, we can take maybe 1 month block to where we're, okay, I'm really going to put a little, I'm not going to just work on my second serve or just work on my return, but I'm going to put a little period of time where I'm going to really just put an emphasis on this one shot I want to try to improve and add that into my practice or at the end of my practice every time.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks for that, and definitely hope you all are taking notes on this interview here. What are and you did talk about this a little bit, but what are the most common couple 2 to 3 tells that you can commonly observe from your opponents, and then give us some tips on maybe like how to specifically observe, because I know especially for newer players or lower level ones, they may not be able to spot these things so easily.
Sometimes for club players, it's like if you never played with somebody, as soon as you start hitting the ball down the middle of the court, kind of get an idea. Are they cheating over on the forehand? Are they cheating over on the backhand? Does the ball toss, drift left? A lot of ball toss. Then they maybe can't, serve wide. Little things that I always look for is how, instantly if you see something that's a weaker shot. If all of a sudden you see something, on the pro level, if it looks a little bit strange, it might not be as much of a weakness. But on the club level, if you see something that looks like kind of a funny hitch in the swing or it doesn't look right, that's the side you probably want to find a little bit more. So the tells are there, a lot of times from the ball toss. But, the big one, you see someone cheating over forehand, backhand, footwork. They're there. You just have to look for them. I call them the little hidden gems.
Yeah, they can definitely be gems, make the big difference, between winning or losing. A lot of these matches just come down to a point or two. And, these USTA League matches always go to like a third set tie break. So every little point or every point counts. A little bit of perhaps a selfish question, Brad, just because I have mixed double sectionals coming up. I'm leaving tonight for it. But what is the optimal mindset going into a tournament? Before your tournaments, like what was your, what were you thinking about? Like, just the mindset part of it.
Well, what's probably most important in mixed, same like doubles, is communication on middle.
Mm.
Especially on volleys, who's got the better forehand volley? Are you on the forehand side of the court? Who's taking overheads when we're both back? Is the male way stronger than the female? What's the communication? Do you want him, or the female's better? Do you want her to take more shots? So I think that, to maximize is understanding the middle of the court. Sometimes if there's an overhead, you guys are both looking to take it, or the high volley, is there a clear decision on who's taking it? Because a lot of times you do see in pro mixed doubles, the guy trying to take a few more balls, but you got to be careful that you don't play the whole side of the court because you leave a big part of the court open. So it's knowing that communication together and knowing your team's strengths.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you, Brad. I'll definitely communicate with my partner for sure on that before the matches. So another thing that you talked about on your podcast was the perfection trap. So, and I guess we kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe expound upon it if you can, just, what that is and then how we can avoid it.
It's funny is I saw some kids just at the JTCC, which, by the way, is an amazing place. Yeah. So many kids, I call it the pursuit of perfection, doesn't exist. It just makes them miserable chasing it. They're always, thinking about the point could be better, or I could do this better, or, it's a tough solution when you always think that it could be better. And you got to learn to be satisfied. A lot of times in tennis, you just got to be a few points better than your opponent to win. Mm-hmm. And when you're chasing to be perfect, it can be really, it can make you crazy. So I learned this from Andre because, obviously he grew up with no matter what the score was, it could have been better. And I would always tell him, listen, if you win 6-4, 6-4, you move on. Give yourself the opportunity to play tomorrow. And sometimes you can be really good and lose. Sometimes you can be pretty shitty and win. That's, whoever you're playing against. That's how it is in tennis. And opponents do matter. But you got to learn that if I won 4-4, it's a good thing.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, you talk about, I think I was listening to you talk about how Andre had won a 3-set match. I forget who it was. Might have been Wheaton, where he was like actually upset, and you told him that no, this is like this is giving you the opportunity to like progress farther in the tournament. And then he won that, and then he had a great year, I think. So
it was a weird match in that it was a huge win in 1994 Canada second round, beating Wheaton, who he had struggled with a little bit. 6 1/3, a long third set breaker. He said he had lost a couple of close matches. And I felt like first round, he'd beaten somebody easy, and, he was pumped about that. But it was this match, I felt like, that he got through. That was the impetus that all of a sudden gave him a chance to play tomorrow. Instead of being miserable, it's like, dude, you got a chance to play tomorrow. There's good things that can happen. Had you lost this match, you're done. If you talk yourself into, I'm going to play terrible the next day, you're going to lose. But the greatness of winning a match, winning ugly like that, is gives yourself an opportunity to compete tomorrow. And tomorrow's a different match. So you don't know how it will play out. But getting through this match was a massive match for him that, I kept explaining it. And as it turned out, he won the tournament and then won the Open a few weeks later. So I always point to that one match can change a lot.
Yeah. It's really, great, how you're able to, think about things positively and just, I guess, afford the best outlook for your players and yourself as well. So as I mentioned, I was having dinner with a friend yesterday, Luis, and he had mentioned a bunch of questions he wanted me to ask you, but I think this one's pretty interesting. So he mentioned Davis Cup singles versus Mexico. I forgot if it was 82 or 83, and you played with Tim Mayett. And And then I think the opponents were Lavaje and Maciel. And he was intrigued because he mentioned that you would only arrive like the day before, the first match, and it's like high altitude. And you still were able to like crush like the opponent. So he was just wondering like how was it that you were able to adjust so quickly in that different sort of environment?
Okay, first of all, in the 82, it was 86.
86. Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah. So it was a long time ago. How the heck does your friend know that I arrived one day before, which is not true. We got there like 5-6 days before. But I actually like to play in altitude because I played a bit in altitude when I was a kid. And I had this one quirk. Everybody, when they would play in altitude, it's funny, as I told this story to like Jim Courier, who he played his first Davis Cup in Mexico in 91. And he was struggling with the altitude. He was stringing his rackets at like 90 pounds and breaking the machine. He couldn't get the right. I would be the only one. I would string my rackets way looser, because I figured if you string your rackets tighter, the ball's still going to fly. So let's say if I was playing with 60, I might string my rackets at 45. And then, practice with it for 3-4 days, same struggling in altitude with loose strings. And then maybe like the day of the match or the day before, I might string it 5 pounds tighter. And all of a sudden, it's like, damn, things are feeling pretty good now. I can keep the ball in the court. But I think altitude is one of those things, too, where you just tell yourself that I'm playing at sea level, I'm going to be fine. Or my opponent's going to struggle more. So I tend to always play better when the conditions were really lousy. When everything was great, everybody seemed like everything was good, maybe it wasn't going to be as good. But if it was the worst wind, or it was the worst place, or it was altitude, it seemed like it was always good for me because I could make something good about the situation that would be good for my game. But I definitely did not get there one day before. I was there at least 5 days before in Mexico City.
Got it. I'm gonna have to give him some attitude for that. But that's funny. But yeah, super interesting to hear about that experience. And yeah, sometimes I have the same mindset too. It's great when you can have that, where you're like, oh, the tougher the conditions are, I hope it's hot today. I hope it's windy because I'm a grittier player and I can figure out, how to win, and some of the strengths of the opponent will be blunted. So that's always
if you tell yourself that you're going to struggle in all those, you're going to be the shit. So that's what it is that's the little mind tricks that you got to try to tell yourself.
Yeah, no, 100%. Love that. And in terms of it's interesting, like inner game of tennis versus winning ugly. What are maybe a couple of the most important points that you found from inner game that maybe complement winning ugly?
You know what's key about everything is finding your own zen, finding your own balance. It's like you can't just take everything from one player and copy it. If you take a little bit of what you read from Inner Game, or a little bit from Winning Ugly, or from an Alan Fox book, or any book, nothing is all verbatim. And I think that's the greatness of learning, is that you learn from some of the things that he was getting into players' minds way back in the day when nobody knew about that. And I think that's it's a cool thing. It's like mine is a little bit different, and everyone's a little different. And so I think having I didn't set out trying to copy anybody else. I just try to, be me. And and that's my strength, and sometimes, and my strength for Winning Ugly was studying club players. And I think that, that can be lost, that a lot of times as a pro, people only think that you can only see through the lenses of pros. I actually feel like, after watching and really studying it, besides being around the game my whole life, I had a good idea about what they could do to get better.
Yeah, you sure do, Brad. What do you think I guess let's go with Andre Agassi and then with Murray Andy Murray. What do you think for each of them is the biggest piece of advice that you gave each one? Hopefully they're different, but if they're the same, it's okay. That really helped them accelerate their career, do you think?
It's funny, looking back, I don't know that, that there's one thing that, sometimes there's things that click in, there's days that click in, there's events that click in. And I think most importantly for me is that, as funny as I just told this to the JTCC as well, to the coaches, the most important thing for a coach is a coach can't have an off day.
Yeah.
Players can have an off day, but coaches can't have off days. If you're there on a bad attitude day as a coach and your players on they're on a bad day, maybe that's that one day that you could have made a bigger difference. And it's having that positive attitude as a coach and always, feeling like that, things are gonna turn. There was matches sometimes, or things, or preparation, but I think more than anything, I just enjoy the process of trying to help somebody fulfill their dreams. I get super motivated trying to do that. So I can't tell you that there's a key word. Sometimes things work better with one player than they do another. And a couple things that I learned early on from coaching to playing, I'm no longer looking through my own lens. I'm looking through what Andre can do. And when you're coaching the next player, you don't compare Andre to Andy to Andy. Every player has their own different strengths and individualities. A lot of football coaches have one way to coach. This is my system. But what happens if you don't have the players to your system? So tennis players, you don't just, I'm going to make you the next. Each one of them is different. So, and some, with Andre, we could talk about strategy for 3 hours. He had a photographic memory. Andy Roddick sometimes would be like Mission Impossible. After 10 seconds, this thing would implode. So you have to be cognizant of that these guys and girls are different. Very important for the coach that they understand you, but you're adapting to, to their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, most definitely. Great advice as usual, Brad. One quick question about serving advice, just because it's such an important stroke, as you mentioned in the book, the most important probably. From a strategy standpoint, what's your best advice that you can give for us to hit, have a more higher percentage of holding our serve?
All right, if you had 10 minutes a day to practice, I practice 5 minutes on my serve, 5 minutes on return. Every shot starts with a serve and return.
Yeah.
And I think that with the serve, what a lot of club players don't understand is thinking about the score. Score can dictate opportunity. If I got a 40-love lead, I could take a little more risk with my first and second. If I'm down love 35th 30, I don't have scoreboard pressure. Then maybe I need to put my first serve in. I need to aim to bigger targets. And I also think that, like you hear it a lot of times in pro tennis, like Darren Cahill would say, what's your working serve? A working serve that you can make 3/4 of the time. Like let's say if you're a 120 server, can you just put the serve in every time at 108? So if you're a club player and, maybe you want to take your second serve out of the equation, on some big points, what's our working serve that we can put our first serve in play? Maybe it's going to take the opportunity to maybe hit a good first serve and win the point. But you know what? We'll be in the point, take our second serve out. Maybe our opponent misses a return. That's a numbers game. So I do think enough players don't put enough serves in play. And that's one serve that you should work on, is a working serve, one that you can put in play under pressure.
Awesome, Brad. Well, Look, I really need everybody to, if you're listening, to get Winning Ugly if you haven't yet. Amazing book. Strategy is the one part, that you can immediately implement and, have success, like technique where it takes a while, depending on what you're changing. And fitness, you got to
Technique
build up.
takes a lot sometimes to make a big technical change. Listen, if you have to, you do, but it can take time. It can be frustrating.
Yeah.
But little changes, strategy wise and thinking out there on the court. Sometimes you got to be your own coach. But
Yeah.
Craig told you under 4-0, unforced errors lose almost 99% of the matches. So put balls in play. Winning ugly is fun.
It sure is. I take winning ugly any day of the week over, losing pretty. And yeah, same thing with my favorite soccer team, Tottenham Hotspur. Our coach, he's a great coach, but we're winning ugly like every week, but we're still winning. So I'll take it. But Brad, last thing is, where can people follow you? I know you're busy and you have a lot of things to do today. So where can people follow you to check out what you're doing, message you, whatever, just see what you're up to?
I'm on Twitter, BG Tennis Nation. That's where I do most. I used to have this podcast with my son, but he's too busy now that hopefully we're going to get that back. We're going to start that back going. But unfortunately, he's been too busy, director of tennis. Obviously I'm on ESPN. But that's where you can see me. Twitter is where I'm most active.
Sounds good, Brad. Well,
ESPN, I'm just a life for tennis dude, that you'll see no matter where I'm at. If I'm on the tennis court, it's a better day. I went this morning already on the way. So it's 9:12. I drove from my house. I left at like 5:37, got to Pepperdine, 6 o'clock in the morning. The sunrise was just coming up. I had 30 minutes on the wall this morning.
Love it. Yeah. Love that.
Started my day in the right note. So no matter what happens the rest of the day, it's already been a good day.
That's right. And any cool nicknames of tennis players that you hear? They're all from Brad.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course, Brad. Well, Brad, thank you so much. We've learned a lot today, and I can't thank you enough for your time.
Good luck on the upcoming doubles trip. And
thank you.
Listen, and tell yourself, no matter what, I'm going to have a great time, and we're going to just compete. We're going to have fun, and we're going to compete.
That's right. That's the key. Just be grateful on the court, like you mentioned.
And listen, every day you get on the tennis court, it's a better day. Keeps you fighting fit, keeps you mentally strong, and it's something that you can do forever. And so that's the greatness of tennis. So that's why I feel like it's one of, that you can just keep growing with. So that's probably one of my favorite things, that even now at 61, I'm still, I'm not going to be what I used to be, but I'm still having fun.
Yeah, exactly. And learning life lessons is, lessons you can apply to life as well through tennis. Great game. Cool. Well, Brad, again, thanks so much, everybody.
Okay,
check out
good luck
Winning
with the
Ugly
podcast, buddy.
Thanks a lot. All right, Brad. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Take care. All right. I really hope that you enjoyed my interview with legendary coach and player Brad Gilbert. Thanks so much, Brad, for coming on to the show. And again, big shout out to Harry Tonk from Tennis Spin. Check out his YouTube channel for sure. Thank you for the hookup there. And yeah, if you enjoyed this episode and got value from it, then I would really, really, really appreciate it if you would leave a review for the Tennis Files podcast. I think we have well over 100 some ratings and reviews. I don't know, 120 or whatever it is. But I would really appreciate yours because it really helps the show, the podcast, move up in the algorithm to help more people see it. And so you're doing a service to your fellow tennis players by simply leaving a review and letting me know what you think about the show and what I can do to improve it and what I'm doing well so that I can do more of that. And hopefully I'm doing something well. Fingers crossed. But yeah, thanks so much. And you can go to tennisfiles.com/Apple Podcasts with an S at the end, or just leave a review in your favorite podcast app of choice that you use to listen to the show. Although leaving a review on Apple Podcasts definitely moves the needle the most. So just letting you know there. And I would like to leave a quote, as I often do at the end of every show. And this one is by actually anonymous. I don't have and names. So sorry about that. But the quote is, if you want to fly, give up everything that weighs you down. Really love that one. And yeah, again, the show notes page is what you want to check out if you want to get the link to Brad's legendary book, Winning Ugly. I know I've said legendary a lot, but it really, really is, his work and the book. So great book, and links to that and other links that I mentioned in the show notes in this show today will be on the show notes page at tennisfiles.com/podcast. All right. With that, thanks so much for listening. I have some more great interviews already recorded to release for you, so looking forward to doing that. So have a fantastic week and keep improving your tennis game and winning ugly and having that attitude of a tough competitor. And I'll see you on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast. This is your host, Mehrbon Aranshad, signing out.